The thunder of hooves shattered the desert silence as Quincy York raced across the New Mexico territory, his pursuers closing in with each passing second. The year was 1878, and the West had no mercy for men who defied the Harlow gang. Blood seeped from the bullet wound in his shoulder, but stopping meant death, and Quincy wasn't ready to die. Not today. He spotted a homestead in the distance, smoke rising from its chimney despite the summer heat. With his horse nearly spent and his vision blurring, he had little choice. The modest ranch house was either salvation or his final resting place. Olivia Harper looked up from her garden at the sound of approaching hooves. Wiping soil-stained hands on her apron, she reached for the Winchester rifle that never left her side, not since Thomas had been killed 6 months ago. The rider was slumped forward, his hat barely clinging to his head, his shirt darkened with what she recognized immediately as blood. "Help!" he managed as the horse stumbled to a halt. "Please!" Her instincts told her to turn him away. Strangers brought nothing but trouble to these parts, but something in his pain-filled eyes reminded her of Thomas in his final moments, desperate and afraid. "Inside," she said firmly, grabbing the horse's reins. "Can you walk?" He nodded weakly, dismounting with a grimace that told her the effort cost him dearly. She helped him to the porch just as the sound of distant riders reached her ears. "Harlow's men," he explained through clenched teeth. "I took what was mine. They didn't agree." Olivia made a split-second decision, shoving him through the door. "Get under the bed. Now." She'd barely concealed him and returned to the porch when 4 riders thundered into her yard, dust billowing around them like desert ghosts. "Afternoon, madam," called the leader, a man with a scar running from his right eye to his lip. "We're looking for a thief, tall fella, wounded. Seen anyone ride through?" Olivia crossed her arms. "I don't get many visitors out here, especially not wounded thieves." The man studied her with cold eyes. "Mind if we have a look around?" "I mind very much. This is private property." The leader dismounted, hand resting on his holstered pistol. "We don't mean any disrespect, widow, but this man stole something valuable from Mr. Harlow. Unless you got the sheriff with you, you have no right to search my home." The tension stretched between them like a drawn bowstring. Finally, the man spat into the dirt. "The sheriff's in Harlow's pocket anyway." He gestured to his men. "Circle the property. Check the barn and the outbuildings." Olivia maintained her composure as they searched everywhere but the house. When they finally departed with threatening promises to return, she waited until the dust settled before going inside. The wounded stranger was still beneath her bed, barely conscious. "They're gone," she said, helping him onto the mattress. "But they'll be back. You've got explaining to do." "Quincy," he murmured. "Quincy York. I'm Olivia Harper. Now let me see that wound before you bleed to death on my best quilt." As she cut away his shirt, revealing a deep graze rather than a penetrating wound, Quincy studied her face, the determined set of her jaw, the weariness around her eyes that spoke of recent grief. "Why help me?" he asked as she cleaned the wound with whiskey, making him wince. "I'm still asking myself that question," she replied, pressing a clean cloth against the bleeding. "Must be temporary insanity. Those men will return." "I'm counting on it," Olivia said, reaching for bandages. "And when they do, you'd better have a good explanation for why you've brought trouble to my door." Quincy grimaced as she tightened the bandage. "It's a long story." "We've got time," she said, nodding toward the window where the sun was beginning to set. "You're not going anywhere tonight." "They don't trust strangers around here, do they?" Quincy asked. Olivia's eyes met his with an intensity that caught him off guard. "Then let me become family," she said, the words hanging in the air between them. "At least that's what I told the last gang that came through looking for someone to rob. Pretended I was expecting my brother. Sometimes a lie is the only protection we have out here." Something unspoken passed between them, in that moment, an understanding that in this harsh land, allies were few and precious. "Get some rest," she said, standing. "Tomorrow, we'll figure out what to do with you." As dusk settled over the ranch, Olivia sat on her porch with the Winchester across her lap, watching the horizon for returning riders. Inside, Quincy York drifted in and out of consciousness, haunted by the memory of what he'd done and uncertain of what morning would bring. The wound wasn't as bad as it first appeared. By morning, Quincy's fever had broken, and he awoke to the smell of coffee and bacon. He found Olivia in the kitchen, her hair tied back loosely, strands escaping to frame her face. "You should be resting," she said without turning. "I've imposed enough." He eased himself into a chair at the small table. "I need to move on before they return." "And go where exactly, in your condition?" She placed a plate before him. "Eat, then we'll talk." The food was simple but delicious, and Quincy realized he hadn't eaten properly in days. As he finished, Olivia sat across from him, her gaze unwavering. "Now, tell me what you stole that has Victor Harlow's men so riled up." Quincy hesitated, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded document. "This land, your land. It wasn't Harlow's to sell." Olivia stared at the deed in confusion. "What are you talking about?" "My husband purchased this ranch fair and square. From Harlow, yes, but Harlow acquired it through fraud." Quincy unfolded the paper. "This is the original land grant, signed by the territorial governor in 1865. It belonged to my father. Harlow forged documents, bribed officials, and had my father killed when he tried to fight back." Olivia's face paled. "Are you saying my husband bought stolen property?" "Your husband was deceived, just like many others. Harlow's been doing this across the territory for years." Quincy's eyes hardened. "I've spent the last 5 years gathering evidence. This document is the final proof I needed." "So, you're not a thief?" "Depends who you ask," Quincy replied with a humorless smile. "In the eyes of the law, probably. In the eyes of justice." He shrugged, then winced at the movement. Olivia was silent for a long moment. "My husband died trying to make this place work. Worked himself to the bone because the soil here is mostly hardpan and rock. If what you're saying is true, it is. Then Harlow not only stole your land, but sold my husband a worthless plot for everything he had." "I'm sorry," Quincy said, and he meant it. "Your husband wasn't the target. Harlow doesn't care who he hurts as long as he profits." Olivia stood abruptly. "We need to get that document to Santa Fe, to the territorial offices. That's where I was headed when they caught up with me. Then we'll go together. It's too dangerous. Harlow has men everywhere. And I have nothing left to lose," she countered. "This ranch is all I have. If your claim is legitimate, we can expose Harlow for what he is." The determination in her eyes reminded Quincy of his own mother, who had fought until her last breath to keep their family together after his father's murder. "We'll need a plan," he conceded, "and supplies." A flicker of something, perhaps hope, crossed Olivia's face. "I'll start packing, but first, let me check your wound." As she changed his bandage, her fingers gentle against his skin, Quincy found himself studying the curve of her neck, the strength in her hands. She was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with conventional beauty, a resilience that shone from within. "Why did you help me?" he asked again. This time, her answer was different. "Because 6 months ago, my husband rode out to confront rustlers alone. Nobody would help him. He died with no one to tend his wounds." Her voice caught slightly. "I couldn't let that happen to someone else." Their eyes met, and for a moment, the air between them seemed charged with unspoken understanding. "Thank you," Quincy said softly. "Don't thank me yet," she replied, securing the fresh bandage. "We've got a long way to go." They spent the day preparing. Olivia gathered supplies while Quincy studied maps, planning a route that would avoid main roads and settlements where Harlow might have influence. By evening, they were ready. "We leave at first light," Quincy said, examining the revolver Olivia had given him her husband's gun. "We'll follow the creek bed north to avoid leaving an obvious trail." Olivia nodded, setting out bedrolls in the main room. "You take the bed again." "I'll sleep here." "I can't take your bed." "You're wounded," she insisted, "and I need you at full strength." As darkness settled over the ranch, they sat on the porch, watching for any sign of Harlow's men. The night was quiet except for the chirping of crickets and the occasional howl of a distant coyote. "Tell me about your father," Olivia said, breaking the companionable silence. Quincy gazed at the stars for a moment before answering. "He was a dreamer. Came west after the war with nothing but hope and determination. Built a successful ranch from nothing." A sad smile crossed his face. He believed in the law, in justice. Even when Harlow started causing trouble, he thought the courts would protect him. And they didn't. The judge was in Harlow's pocket, When Pa tried to appeal, they ambushed him on the road home. Quincy's voice hardened. I was 16, found him bleeding out by the creek. His last words were to tell me to run. But you came back. Took me 5 years. I needed evidence, connections, skills. He glanced at her. What about your husband? Olivia's fingers twisted the simple gold band she still wore. Thomas was a good man, a dreamer too, I suppose. Believed he could make anything grow with enough work. Her voice softened with memory. We came from Ohio. He wanted to build something of our own, away from his family's expectations. No children? Quincy asked carefully. We tried, she said simply, the pain evident in those 2 words. It wasn't meant to be. They fell silent again, the weight of their shared losses hanging between them. We should get some rest, Olivia finally said, rising from her chair. Tomorrow will be a long day. Quincy caught her hand as she passed. We'll make it right, he promised, for both of them. Her fingers tightened briefly around his before she withdrew. Good night, Quincy. Good night, Olivia. Dawn was just breaking when they set out, the land still shrouded in the half-light that made distances deceptive. They rode single file along the creek bed, Quincy leading on Olivia's dun mare, while she followed on her husband's sturdy gelding. His own horse needed rest after the hard run of the previous day. The terrain grew increasingly rugged as they moved north, the creek carving deeper into the landscape. By midday they had entered a narrow canyon where juniper trees clung to the rocky slopes. We should rest the horses, Olivia suggested, gesturing to a small clearing where the canyon widened slightly. As they dismounted, Quincy winced, his wounded shoulder protesting. Let me see, Olivia said, approaching him with concern. It's fine, he insisted, but she ignored him, unbuttoning his shirt enough to check the bandage. You're bleeding again. Sit. He obeyed, watching as she deftly changed the dressing. Her touch was clinical but gentle, her face focused with concentration. You would have made a good doctor, he remarked. A brief smile touched her lips. My father wanted me to be a teacher, said I had the patience for it. Why didn't you? Met Thomas, fell in love, chose a different path. She secured the bandage. No regrets, though. None, Quincy asked softly. Her eyes met his, something vulnerable flickering there, before she looked away. We should eat something. They shared a simple meal of jerky and hardtack, washing it down with water from the creek. As they prepared to continue, the distant sound of hoofbeats echoed through the canyon. Riders, Quincy said, instantly alert. Could be nothing. Or could be Harlow's men, Olivia countered, already gathering their supplies. They mounted quickly, pushing deeper into the canyon where the walls rose higher, offering fewer escape routes but better concealment. The sound of pursuit grew closer. There, Olivia pointed to a narrow side passage almost hidden by boulders. They squeezed their horses through the opening, finding themselves in a small box canyon with sheer walls on 3 sides. It was a perfect hiding place, or a perfect trap. If they find us here, we're cornered, Quincy observed grimly. Then they'd better not find us, Olivia replied, dismounting and leading her horse behind a large rock formation. They waited in tense silence as the sounds of riders passed by the hidden entrance. Minutes stretched endlessly until finally the hoofbeats faded into the distance. That was too close, Quincy exhaled, leaning against the cool canyon wall. Olivia nodded, her face pale. They're searching the canyon systematically. They must know we're headed north. We need to change course. Quincy studied the high walls surrounding them. But first, we need to get out of this box. They spent the next hour searching for an exit, finally discovering a steep game trail that wound up the back wall of the canyon. It was treacherous going, leading the horses up the narrow path. But by sunset, they had reached the top and found themselves on a high plateau overlooking the surrounding territory. We'll camp here tonight, Quincy decided, surveying the panoramic view that would allow them to spot anyone approaching. No fire. They made a cold camp, sharing the last of the bread Olivia had packed. As night fell, the temperature dropped rapidly, the desert giving up its heat to the clear sky above. Take my blanket, Quincy offered, seeing Olivia shiver. And let you freeze? No. She hesitated, then added practically, we should share body heat. It's the sensible thing to do. The suggestion caught him off guard, But he couldn't argue with the logic. They arranged their bedrolls side by side and awkwardly lay down together, the tension between them palpable. "This isn't improper," Olivia said, though whether she was trying to convince him or herself wasn't clear. "It's survival." "Of course," Quincy agreed, acutely aware of her warmth beside him. They lay in silence for a while, watching the stars emerge in brilliant clarity above them. "My husband and I used to sleep under the stars sometimes," Olivia said softly. "He knew all the constellations." "My mother taught me a few," Quincy replied. "See there? That's Cassiopeia, the queen." He pointed to a distinctive W-shaped pattern of stars. "And that bright one? The North Star, always constant, always showing the way." Olivia turned slightly toward him. "Is that why you became a lawman?" Quincy looked at her in surprise. "How did you know?" "The way you handle yourself, the way you talk about justice." She smiled slightly. "And the badge you keep in your saddlebag." "Former lawman," he corrected. "I quit when I realized I couldn't fight Harlow from within a corrupt system." "So you decided to become a thief instead?" "I decided to get justice by any means necessary." His voice hardened. "But I'm no thief. I only took back what was stolen from my family." "I didn't mean—" "It's all right," he interrupted, softening his tone. "I know how it looks." They fell silent again, the night growing deeper around them. Eventually, the chill drove them closer together until Olivia's head rested against his good shoulder, her breathing evening out as she fell asleep. Quincy remained awake longer, marveling at how quickly life could change. A week ago, he'd been alone in his quest for justice. Now he had an ally, one whose gentle strength and quiet determination stirred something in him he'd thought long buried. He finally drifted to sleep with her warm beside him, dreaming of possibilities he'd never allowed himself to consider. Morning brought a stunning sunrise and a difficult decision. From their vantage point, they could see riders in the distance, methodically searching the area they'd passed through the day before. "They're not giving up," Olivia observed, passing Quincy the spyglass. "Harlow must want that deed badly," he replied, studying the distant figures. "We need to change directions completely. East would take us into open country we'd be exposed. South is back toward Harlow. West then," Olivia suggested, "through the Sangre de Cristo range." Quincy considered this. "It's rugged terrain, but it would provide cover. We'd need to resupply soon, though. There's a trading post at the foot of the mountains. The owner, Quinn Ravenheart, is half Cherokee. He has no love for men like Harlow." "You trust him?" "He was kind to me after Thomas died." Olivia's expression became distant. "Brought me supplies when I couldn't bring myself to go to town." "Then we head west," Quincy decided. "But we'll need to be careful approaching the trading post." They traveled cautiously through the day, keeping to ridgelines where they could survey the land before descending, always watchful for pursuit. By late afternoon, they could see the trading post in the distance, a cluster of low buildings nestled in a small valley where a stream cut through the foothills. "I'll go alone," Olivia said as they observed from a concealed position. "If Harlow's men are watching the post, they won't recognize me as quickly." "It's too dangerous," Quincy protested. "I've been trading there for years. It would look suspicious if I didn't go in." Her expression brooked no argument. "Wait here. If I'm not back in an hour, assume something's wrong." Reluctantly, Quincy agreed. He watched anxiously as she rode openly down the trail toward the trading post, his hand never far from his gun. The hour that followed was one of the longest of his life. But just as he was preparing to go after her, Olivia appeared on the trail, her saddlebags visibly fuller than before. She was alone. "Quinn says Harlow's men came through yesterday," she reported as she rejoined him. "They're offering a substantial reward for information." "Did he suspect anything?" "No. I told him Thomas had relatives visiting, and I was stocking up." She began transferring supplies from her saddlebags. "He mentioned something else Harlow's bringing in professional trackers from Texas." Quincy swore under his breath. "We need to move faster. We can cut through the high country. Quinn gave me a map." She unfolded a crude but detailed drawing. "There's an old Spanish trail that could save us days." As they studied the map together, their shoulders touching, Quincy was struck by how naturally they had fallen into partnership. There was an ease between them that belied the short time they'd known each other. "What?" Olivia asked, noticing his thoughtful expression. Just wondering what happens after Santa Fe, he said honestly. When this is all over. Something flickered in her eyes. Uncertainty, perhaps. Or possibility. I haven't thought that far ahead, she admitted. For months, I've been living day to day, surviving. And now? She met his gaze directly. Now, I'm remembering what it feels like to have purpose, to fight for something. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken feelings, until Quincy finally broke the silence. We should get moving while we still have daylight. They followed the map into increasingly mountainous terrain, the Spanish Trail proving to be little more than a faint track winding through dense pine forests and rocky passes. By nightfall, they had climbed high enough that the air carried a distinct chill. We can risk a small fire tonight, Quincy decided, surveying their sheltered campsite beneath an overhanging cliff. These woods are too thick for anyone to spot the light from a distance. The fire was a luxury after their cold camp of the previous night. They prepared a hot meal from their fresh supplies and sat close to the flames, the dancing light casting warm shadows on their faces. Tell me about your life before all this, Olivia requested as they finished eating. Before Harlow took your land. Quincy stared into the fire, memories surfacing that he rarely allowed himself to revisit. It was good, he said simply. We had a big ranch, raised horses. My mother grew the finest roses in the territory, stubborn woman that she was. Said if she could make beauty grow in such a harsh place, it was proof that anything was possible. She sounds remarkable. She was. He smiled at the memory. After Pa was killed, she tried to keep the ranch going, but without the deed, and with Harlow's influence growing, we didn't stand a chance. She died of pneumonia the following winter. I'm sorry, Olivia said softly. What about you, before Thomas, before coming west? I led a sheltered life in Ohio. Father was a banker, mother obsessed with propriety. She chuckled lightly. They were horrified when I fell in love with a farmer with Western dreams. Did they disown you? No, but they made their disapproval clear. Mother still writes monthly letters listing eligible widowers in Cleveland who might rescue me from my unfortunate circumstances. And would you want to be rescued? Quincy asked, his voice deliberately light. Olivia's eyes met his across the fire. I've never wanted rescue, only partnership. Thomas understood that. We faced everything together, the journey west, the hardships of starting over, the disappointments. She trailed off, then added softly, When he died, I lost more than my husband. I lost my ally in the world. The vulnerability in her voice touched something deep within Quincy. Without thinking, he reached across the space between them and took her hand. You're not alone anymore, he said. Her fingers tightened around his, and for a moment, neither spoke, the connection between them saying more than words could express. Later, as they prepared for sleep, the earlier awkwardness was gone. They arranged their bedrolls close to the dying fire and lay facing each other, the light casting soft shadows across Olivia's features. When this is over, Quincy said quietly, what do you want? She considered the question thoughtfully. Peace, a place that's truly mine, the chance to build something lasting. Her eyes met his. What about you? Justice first, he replied. After that, he hesitated. I never let myself think beyond justice. It seemed like tempting fate. And now? Now I'm starting to remember there might be more to life than settling old scores. His hand found hers in the darkness. Thanks to you. They fell asleep that way, hands entwined, the mountain night wrapping around them like a blanket of stars. The path grew steeper and more treacherous as they climbed higher into the mountains the next day. By mid-afternoon, they had reached a ridge that offered a breathtaking view of the valley below and the distant plains beyond. We should reach the pass by tomorrow, Quincy said, consulting the map. Then it's downhill to Santa Fe. Do you think they're still following? Olivia asked, scanning the landscape behind them. I'm counting on it, he replied grimly. But they'll be following our original trail. This route should put us well ahead of them. They continued along the ridgeline until dusk, when a sudden summer storm forced them to seek shelter in a shallow cave. Rain lashed the mountainside as lightning split the sky, the thunder rolling through the valleys like distant cannon fire. So much for our lead, Quincy said in frustration, watching the downpour from the cave entrance. This will slow us down. But it will also wash away our tracks, Olivia pointed out, arranging their wet gear to dry. There's always a bright side. He smiled despite his worry. You sound like my mother. I'll take that as a compliment. As night fell and the storm continued unabated, they huddled together for warmth, the small cave growing chilly as temperatures dropped. Wrapped in damp blankets, they listened to the rain drumming against the stone. I used to love storms as a child, Olivia said, breaking the comfortable silence. My father would read to me during thunderstorms to keep me from being afraid. What did he read? Poetry mostly. Wordsworth, Byron, Tennyson. He had a beautiful reading voice. Recite something for me, Quincy requested. Olivia looked surprised, then thoughtful. After a moment, she began speaking softly. The rain to the wind said, "You push and I'll pelt." They so smote the garden bed that the flowers actually knelt, and lay lodged, though not dead. I know how the flowers felt. That's beautiful, Quincy said when she finished. Who wrote it? Robert Frost, she replied. It always makes me think of resilience, how sometimes we must bend to survive, but we don't break. Like you, he observed, after Thomas died. She was quiet for a moment. There were days I wanted to break, she admitted. Days I thought it would be easier. What kept you going? Stubbornness at first. Then, gradually, the realization that Thomas wouldn't want his death to become the end of my story, too. She shifted slightly, looking up at him. What about you? After losing everything, what kept you fighting? Rage for a long time, Quincy answered honestly. Then, like you said, stubbornness. The need to prove Harlow hadn't destroyed everything. Outside, the storm began to abate. The thunder more distant now, the rain softening to a gentle patter. In the dim light of their small lantern, their faces were close, breaths mingling in the cool air. Olivia, Quincy said softly, her name a question on his lips. She answered by closing the distance between them, her mouth meeting his with tentative warmth that quickly deepened into something more urgent. His arm circled her waist, drawing her closer as years of loneliness melted away in the heat of their embrace. When they finally pulled apart, her eyes searched his face, uncertainty mingling with desire. I didn't expect this, she whispered. Neither did I, he confessed, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. But I'm not sorry. Nor am I. She rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. But the timing. I know. There's too much unresolved. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. But when this is over, let's first make sure we survive it, she interrupted gently. One day at a time. They held each other through the night, the line between comfort and desire blurring as they drifted in and out of sleep, the storm gradually passing to reveal a star-filled sky beyond the cave entrance. Morning brought clear skies and the realization that their supplies were running low again. The mountain trail proved more difficult than the map had suggested, with washouts from the storm forcing them to find alternative routes. By midday, they reached a plateau where the trees thinned, offering panoramic views and, more worryingly, less cover. They were crossing this exposed area when Olivia suddenly pulled her horse to a stop. Riders, she said, pointing to a distant trail below them. 3 of them. Quincy took out the spyglass, focusing on the riders. Harlow's men, he confirmed, recognizing the leader's distinctive hat. They must have figured out we changed direction. How? We've been so careful? Someone at the trading post, maybe, Quincy guessed. Or they're just covering all possible routes. He studied the landscape. They haven't seen us yet, but they're heading this way. The pass is still hours ahead, Olivia said, consulting the map. We won't make it before they catch up. Quincy considered their options. There's another way, he said finally. It's risky, but it might be our only chance. He pointed to a steep ravine cutting through the mountainside. That leads down to the eastern slope. If we can get down there before they spot us, we could circle around and reach Santa Fe from a different direction. That ravine looks treacherous, Olivia observed. It is, but I don't see any other choice. The descent was every bit as dangerous as it appeared. They had to dismount and lead the horses, navigating loose rocks and near vertical drops, each step treacherous. Several times they almost lost their footing, the horses balking at particularly steep sections. They were halfway down when Quincy's mare slipped, sending a cascade of rocks tumbling into the ravine with a noise that seemed to echo throughout the mountains. "Get down!" Quincy hissed, pulling Olivia into the shelter of a boulder overhang. They held their breath, waiting to see if the noise had attracted attention. Minutes passed, and just as they began to relax, voices drifted down from above. The hunters had heard the rock slide and were investigating. "We need to move," Quincy whispered. "Now!" They continued their descent with renewed urgency, no longer able to choose their path carefully. When they reached the bottom of the ravine, they found themselves in a dense forest of pine and aspen, the ground soft with years of accumulated needles. "Which way?" Olivia asked, her voice hushed. Quincy oriented himself using the sun's position. "East, through the trees. We need to put as much distance between us and them as possible before they figure out where we went." They moved through the forest as quickly as they dared, leading the tired horses through the undergrowth. The sound of pursuit faded, but they couldn't be sure if that meant they'd lost their trackers or if Harlow's men were simply being more cautious. As evening approached, they came to a swift-flowing river, swollen from the previous night's rain. The water churned around boulders, creating white rapids that would be impossible to ford. "We'll have to follow it downstream," Quincy decided. "Find a calmer crossing." They made camp that night in a small clearing near the river, too exhausted to continue in the darkness. The constant tension had taken its toll. They ate in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. "We're so close," Olivia said finally, staring into their small fire. "Santa Fe can't be more than a day's ride once we cross the river. Assuming we can find a safe crossing," Quincy added. "And assuming Harlow doesn't have men waiting in the city. Do you think he might?" "It's possible. He has connections throughout the territory." Quincy ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "We've come too far to fail now." Olivia moved to sit beside him, her shoulder touching his in silent support. "We won't fail. We'll find a way." Her quiet confidence bolstered his resolve. Impulsively, he pulled her into his arms, his mouth finding hers with an intensity that surprised them both. She responded with equal fervor, her fingers threading through his hair as the kiss deepened. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Quincy rested his forehead against hers. "When this is over," he began. "When this is over," she echoed, understanding in her eyes. No more needed to be said, the promise hung between them. All the sweeter for being unspoken, they spread their bedrolls together that night, finding comfort in each other's arms. As Olivia drifted to sleep against his chest, Quincy stared up at the stars visible through the forest canopy, allowing himself, for the first time in years, to imagine a future beyond vengeance. Morning brought a startling discovery. The river had receded overnight, revealing a series of stepping stones that offered a possible crossing. They wasted no time, carefully leading the horses across the still swift current, the animals nervous but compliant. On the far bank, they mounted and pushed eastward, the terrain gradually becoming less steep as the mountains gave way to foothills. By midday, they could see the sprawling landscape of northern New Mexico stretching before them, and in the distance, the hazy outline of Santa Fe. "We made it," Olivia said, relief evident in her voice. "Not quite yet," Quincy cautioned. "The open ground between here and there is where we're most vulnerable." They approached the city cautiously, avoiding the main roads and keeping to arroyos and dry washes where possible. As they neared the outskirts, Quincy suggested they separate. "I'll draw attention if I ride in with you," he explained. "Harlow's men will be watching for a couple. If you go alone, you might slip through unnoticed." "And leave you behind?" Olivia shook her head firmly. "We started this together. We'll finish it together." "It's not about leaving me behind," he insisted. "It's about making sure the deed reaches the territorial offices. That's all that matters." "You matter," she said simply. "I won't risk you being caught while I ride to safety." The emotion in her voice silenced his arguments. After a moment, he nodded. "All right, together. But we need a disguise of some sort." They fashioned a rough plan. Using supplies purchased from a small Mexican village on the outskirts, Olivia transformed herself with a rebozo covering her hair and most of her face. Quincy, meanwhile, borrowed clothing from an obliging farmer, exchanging his distinctive cowboy attire for the simple garb of a laborer. As dusk fell, they entered Santa Fe from the south, two unremarkable travelers among many in the busy territorial capital. They found lodging in a small boarding house near the plaza, the landlady asking few questions beyond whether they could pay in advance. Their room was tiny but clean, with a narrow bed and a small window overlooking a courtyard. As night settled over the city, they sat together on the bed, the deed spread before them. "First light," Quincy said, tracing the route to the territorial offices on a crude map of the city. "We'll go as soon as the offices open. The territorial governor has been investigating Harlow for months, but lacked evidence. This deed is the final proof he needs." "And then?" Olivia asked, the question loaded with meaning beyond the immediate future. Quincy took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Then, we have choices to make. Together, I hope." She leaned against him, her head fitting perfectly into the curve of his shoulder. "I'd like that." The night was long, both too keyed up to sleep much. They talked in hushed voices about possibilities returning to Olivia's ranch once Harlow was brought to justice, perhaps rebuilding Quincy's family land, or even starting fresh somewhere else entirely. The future, for so long foreclosed by grief and vengeance, suddenly seemed wide open with possibility. Dawn found them already dressed and ready, the precious deed secured inside Quincy's shirt. They ate a quick breakfast in the boarding house dining room, speaking little, aware that anyone could be listening. As they stepped into the early morning light, the streets were already coming alive with vendors and workers. They moved purposefully toward the government buildings on the north side of the plaza, maintaining the pretense of being simple citizens on routine business. They were halfway across the plaza when Quincy spotted them, three of Harlow's men, including the scarred leader, positioned near the territorial offices. They hadn't been seen yet, but there was no way to reach the building without being spotted. "We need to split up," Quincy said urgently, pulling Olivia into the shadow of an arcade. "There's no other way." She began to protest, but he silenced her with a quick kiss. "I'll create a distraction. When they follow me, you take the deed to the governor's office. Ask for Judge Caldwell. He knew my father. He'll help you." "Quincy, no. We don't have time to argue." He pressed the document into her hands. "I'll meet you back at the boarding house. If I'm not there by nightfall—" He hesitated. "Don't wait for me." Before she could object further, he stepped away, moving purposefully toward the opposite side of the plaza. Olivia watched, heart pounding, as he deliberately passed close to Harlow's men, then suddenly bolted down a side street. The reaction was immediate. All three men gave chase, exactly as Quincy had intended. Swallowing her fear, Olivia hurried toward the territorial offices, the deed clutched tightly in her hand. The government building was imposing, with high ceilings and marble floors that echoed under her boots. She approached a clerk at the front desk, trying to keep her voice steady. "I need to see Judge Caldwell. It's urgent." The clerk looked up with disinterest. "The judge is in a meeting. You'll have to wait." "Please," Olivia insisted. "It concerns Victor Harlow and land fraud. The judge will want to see this immediately." At the mention of Harlow, the clerk's expression changed. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Wait here." Minutes stretched like hours as Olivia stood in the grand foyer, every sound making her jump. Had Quincy escaped? Were Harlow's men still pursuing him? Or had they realized the diversion and returned? Finally, the clerk reappeared with an older gentleman, tall, distinguished, with silver hair and penetrating eyes. "I'm Judge Caldwell. You mentioned Harlow?" "Yes, Your Honor." Olivia glanced around nervously before withdrawing the deed. "This is evidence of his fraud. He's been stealing land throughout the territory, including the York family ranch." The judge's eyebrows rose. "York? As in Samuel York?" "His son, Quincy, recovered this document. It proves Harlow forged deeds to sell land that wasn't his." Her words tumbled out quickly. "My husband purchased one such property. Quincy has been trying to get justice for years." Judge Caldwell examined the deed carefully, his expression growing grimmer with each moment. "This is indeed the original land grant," he confirmed. "Where is young York now?" Olivia's voice faltered. "Creating a diversion. Harlow's men were watching the building." Alarm crossed the judge's face. He turned to the clerk. "Send for the marshal immediately." To Olivia, he said, "Come with me. You'll both need protection until we can arrest Harlow." Events moved swiftly after that. The territorial marshal organized a search for Quincy while placing Olivia under guard in the judge's chambers. As morning turned to afternoon with no word, her anxiety grew. Judge Caldwell, meanwhile, issued warrants for Harlow's arrest based on the evidence she had provided. "The governor has been building a case against Harlow for months," he explained. "This deed is the final piece we needed. Your husband and many others will have their rightful claims restored." "Thomas is dead," Olivia said quietly. "He never knew he'd been cheated." The judge's expression softened. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Harper. Rest assured, justice will be done." But justice for Thomas felt hollow without knowing Quincy's fate. As the afternoon waned with no news, Olivia's fear deepened. Had she lost another man she cared for to Harlow's cruelty? It was nearing dusk when the door to the judge's chambers burst open. The marshal entered, supporting a battered but very much alive Quincy. "Found him in an alley near the plaza," the marshal reported. "Gave Harlow's men quite a chase before they cornered him." Olivia rushed forward, relief making her dizzy. Quincy's face was bruised, his lips split, but his eyes lit up at the sight of her. "You did it," he said, his voice rough. "I knew you would." "We did it," she corrected, gently touching his bruised cheek. "Together." Judge Caldwell stepped forward, extending his hand to Quincy. "Your father would be proud, son. Harlow has been arrested, along with several of his associates. The governor himself is overseeing the case." "It's really over?" Quincy asked, seeming almost unable to believe it. "It's over," the judge confirmed. "The land grants will be restored to their rightful owners. It will take time to sort through all of Harlow's frauds, but justice will be done." That night, under guard at a hotel provided by the territorial government, Quincy and Olivia sat together on a balcony overlooking the plaza. The city lights twinkled below them, the stars shone above, and between them, a future neither had dared imagine began to take shape. "What happens now?" Olivia asked, her hand entwined with his. Quincy looked at her, really looked at her, the strength in her eyes, the gentleness in her touch, the resilience that had brought her through so much loss. "Now," he said softly, "we have a choice. Your ranch, my family's land, both will be restored to us. We could rebuild either, or both." He hesitated, then added, "Or we could start fresh somewhere else entirely, together." "Together," she repeated, the word full of promise. "I think I'd like that." "Which option?" Olivia smiled, the first truly carefree smile he had seen from her. "Any of them, all of them, as long as we're together." She leaned closer. "When you rode into my yard that day, bleeding and desperate, I never imagined that we'd end up here." He completed her thought. "Neither did I, but I'm grateful for whatever fate brought me to your door." "Even getting shot?" she teased gently. "Even that," he agreed with a chuckle. "Small price to pay for finding you." Under the New Mexico stars, their lips met in a kiss that sealed unspoken promises of healing, of new beginnings, of a love born in adversity but destined to flourish in peace. 6 months later, the ranch that had once been Thomas Harper's struggling homestead was transformed. New fences marked expanded boundaries, the combined lands of the Harper and York properties. Legally joined just as their owners had been joined in marriage 2 months prior, Olivia stood on the porch of their newly expanded home, watching as Quincy worked with the horses in the corral. The winter sun cast long shadows across the land that was truly theirs now. The legal battles with Harlow's associates finally settled. Victor Harlow himself remained in territorial prison, his empire of fraud dismantled piece by Judge Caldwell and the governor. Many families had reclaimed stolen lands, their gratitude expressed in the community that had formed among them, neighbors who understood the value of justice and the importance of standing together. As Quincy finished his work and walked toward the house, Olivia felt the familiar warmth that his presence always brought her. The past year had taught her that grief wasn't the end of her story, merely a chapter in a longer tale that continued to unfold in unexpected ways. "Penny for your thoughts?" Quincy asked, climbing the steps to join her. "Just thinking about how much has changed," she replied, leaning into him as his arms circled her waist. "A year ago, I was alone, convinced that part of my life was over. And now? She turned in his embrace, looking up at the man who had begun as a wounded stranger and become the center of her world. Now I know better. Life doesn't end with loss. It transforms. His kiss was gentle, a familiar comfort that still held the promise of passion. When they separated, his eyes held a question. Any regrets about choosing to stay here instead of starting fresh elsewhere? Olivia shook her head. This land has seen both our sorrows and our joy. It feels right to build our future where both our pasts are honored. Her hand drifted unconsciously to her stomach, where the first subtle signs of new life had begun to make themselves known, a secret she planned to share with him that very night. Besides, I have a feeling our story is just beginning. As the sun set over their joined lands, casting the desert in gold and crimson, they stood together on the threshold of all that was to come. The wounds of the past would never fully disappear, but they had healed enough to allow new growth like desert flowers after a cleansing rain, all the more precious for the harshness they had endured. I love you, Quincy said simply, the words still new enough to feel like a gift. And I love you, Olivia replied. The promise in those words extending beyond the moment, beyond the horizon, into a shared future neither could have imagined when a desperate stranger had ridden into a widow's yard and changed both their lives forever.